emergency?
I have an emergency here.
April 13th, 2015. Lucky found he's experiencing a mental health crisis at a relative's house. He picks up the phone and calls 911 for help for himself.
Hello, what's the address, please?
It's the last phone call he'd ever make.
They're coming, Lucky. They're coming. You called them. They're coming.
According to court documents, Lucky had returned from the Coachella Music Festival where he had used some drugs. He hadn't slept in several days. A family member told the 911 operator Lucky was paranoid. They were trying to get him to the hospital. A short time after that call for help, 2 deputies showed up.
Things started to go sideways, started to go badly, when the sheriff's deputies made a series of decisions that, in our view, escalated rather than de-escalated the encounter.
Tim Scott is the family's attorney. He says when San Diego County Sheriff's deputies got to the house, there was an all-out fistfight between Lucky and the deputies. Lucky was repeatedly shocked with a taser. Then more deputies showed up, and he says Lucky ended up on the ground.
They put him prone on his stomach on the ground, continued to apply force to his back, and critically, in our view, they then put him into a configuration that can only be described as a hog tie.
Scott says Lucky was put in an ambulance, hands and feet bound behind his back. On the way to the hospital, Lucky's heart stopped. He died a few days later.
How hard has this been on you and your family?
I don't even know where to start. I never thought I would lose my husband when I'm 33. Let alone have my kids without a father.
Lawan Nguyen is Lucky's wife. They have 2 kids.
Love Caden and Kira. Sorry. They were his light.
Lawan asked us not to show their faces. When their dad died, they were only toddler and infant stage, not old enough to remember much about him. But that doesn't mean they don't crave his love.
There's days where, Caden would ask me or tell me, I wish Daddy was here.
Lawan says everything she does is for them. Part of that is working to make sure the San Diego County Sheriff's Department changes its policy known as the maximum restraint technique. What family attorneys say Lucky was placed in when his heart stopped. In court documents, attorneys for the County of San Diego say the medical examiner found that injuries from the altercation with deputies and the restraint did not cause Lucky's cardiac arrest and subsequent death. The family, their experts, and eventually a jury disagreed.
It boils down to this. When law enforcement bind a suspect's hands and feet behind their back, and their upper and lower extremities are then drawn together behind their back so that their hands and their feet are in some manner connected together, that puts an enormous amount of pressure and strain on your respiratory system.
Attorney Mark Fleming is part of Lawan's legal team.
You're going to jail.
He points to this Sheriff's Department training video that was made in the late 2000s.
You have the restraint?
It's an 18-minute recording we're told is still used today that runs through several examples of how to apply the maximum restraint technique. The video teaches deputies in a controlled environment how to connect parts of the body together with the strap by running it from the waist across the front of the body.
In this configuration, it doesn't come close to the danger that Lucky was placed in or other people who end up dying are placed in. But what it does is it begins to create a dangerous situation.
In Lucky's case, the configuration was different than the training video. Fleming says the cord was run behind his back. His hands and feet only separated by a few inches.
I think the video does a terrible job of explaining the risks of positional asphyxia, the risk of suffocation, and the fact that this is a potentially deadly exercise that they're doing.
While that's what the video teaches, at least one deputy testified at trial there are different ways to apply the restraints. In transcripts from the trial, Deputy Giovanni Silva explained that connection point can either be behind the back or on the side. It's just imperative that both clasps are affixed together. In court documents, the Sheriff's Department explained that the use of maximum restraints, attaching ankles to a cord around the waist, is not at all the same as hog tying. attaching ankles to wrists, which they don't allow. But their use of force policy doesn't specifically say that.
Do you believe that if departments in San Diego County got rid of these types of techniques, it would save lives?
Absolutely.
The Sheriff's Department argues maximum restraints are a commonly used technique throughout the state and beyond. But Team 10 found some departments across the country have different language in their policies, and some moving away from it entirely. In New York and Los Angeles, both police departments' policies clearly state hands and feet shouldn't be bound together. In Aurora, Colorado, the police department policy says not to secure hands and feet. That department says they're moving away from restraints that tie together and toward a device called the wrap, which they say better prevents respiratory distress. The Sheriff's Department also uses the wrap. Their use of force data shows it's now used more often than the cord cuff as a maximum restraint technique. We asked the Sheriff's Department if they'd consider adding language to their policy or changing it altogether. They told us they can't answer due to pending litigation. They also won't talk about Lucky Foundsy or that $85 million verdict. They're asking it be thrown out, reduced, or for a new trial, claiming there were a bunch of trial errors, and that amount was excessive.
Lucky loved life. He loved his family.
Lucky's death is not something Lawan wants to talk about. She hasn't told her kids exactly how their dad died. Nothing will ever make it okay, but she believes if policy changes, one day it might help them process.
Do you think that one day you'll be able to talk to them about this?
I hope so. You know, and right now my focus is just to protect them.
Adam Rakusin, ABC 10 News.
Talk about that, or since we have the job to do with it as well, but